This is but a fraction of the insane power you can achieve in Ghost of Tsushima. With the PC version out, it's time we take a look at the top 5 best builds of all time. And to better rank them, we're going to measure how well they handle different gameplay scenarios, from single to multi-target combat, survivability, and yes, even ease of use. And then we're gonna score it from 1 to 5, with 1 being the default, and then every advantage will add another point or more on top, depending on the impact of the involved mechanics. Jumping straight into the first one, there's the Sakai clan armor build, or how I like to call it, the ultimate standoff. And that's because of its third ability, which extends the standoff streak by another 2 once you hit level 4. Meaning that with max points invested into the skill, that means you can take up to as high as 5 enemies in one single standoff. That's usually enough to completely wipe out most normal groups, or at least inflict heavy casualties in some of the larger ones. Coupled with the fact that standoffs guarantee one-shot even camp leaders, this is an easy 3 out of 5 in terms of group wipeout potential. Now the drawback here is of course that you can only do standoffs before initiating combat, and enemies, if they detect you, will also completely prevent that. It's also something that you can only do once per combat, which is why it only gets a 3 out of 5. In terms of single target boss fights, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 5 because its only advantage over here is its melee damage bonus from the armor set. Meanwhile, in terms of survivability, it gets an easy 3 out of 5 given its huge bonus to HP and of course the massive amounts of resolve that you get from the standoffs, meaning that at the start of the fights you have a lot of ways to cast abilities or even regenerate a lot of HP. It's also not super difficult to build either, given how the armor already kinda does most of the work for you, leaving ample room for many charm setups, from melee focused to more defense, even ones focused on the Way of the Flame, assuming that you go for the New Game Plus mode. Now, if the Sakai build was all about being a samurai who confronts his enemies head-on, the Ghost Armor is in complete antithesis. Its main attribute reduces enemy detection speed, making it one of the best options for chain assassinations, which only become better with the charm of Nekoma's Hunt from the Iki Island DLC, letting you take down up to 4 targets, with the final hit being a kunai throw that's very stylish and pretty much one-shots everything. Given the power of the chain assassination mechanic, plus the ability to cast it again immediately after dropping a smoke bomb, means you can pretty much wipe out entire groups of enemies before they even get a chance to react. The buff to the Ghost Stance to reduce the number of kills needed to enter that by 2 is yet another OP choice, which you can further buff of course with the Terrify mechanic on the third ability, which basically means this gets an easy 5 out of 5 for group wipeouts. In boss fights, not so much. Unless you specifically get charms to help you with one-on-one duels, the Ghost Armor build doesn't really have any practical advantage to help you with that. That's because you can't really use ghost weapons nor the ghost stance during any of these moments, so that's why it's only getting a 1 out of 5. Despite this though, I find it being capable to avoid detection and its team wipeout potential to be some great boost to survivability. Things can still go wrong, such as being left without any smoke bombs or being too squishy on the hard difficulty, but it's still getting a 3 out of 5 in that. Also, just like in the case of the Sakai armor, it doesn't take many charms to excel, plus you also get it early in Act 2, so definitely extra points in terms of ease of use. Now for the next spot at number 3, I might get a bit of flack for this, but I think that the next build is so unique, it definitely warrants a higher ranking. Of course, I'm talking about the Tadayori build, the only build in the game that can purely focus on archery, without any melee involved whatsoever, except for when the story moments need it. With the charm of Sugaru's Sight from Iki Island, this build only became even more OP, letting you practically auto-aim directly at the enemy's heads while also shooting up to 3 arrows at the same time. Not that this is ever needed, since 1 arrow is enough for an insta-kill, but it definitely helps with generating even more arrows to your quiver, which is done by combining extra Charm of Izanagi with 2 of Fortune, which pretty much guarantees you never run out of arrows as long as you hit headshots. Coupled with the armor's natural boost to slow motion effect and some extra concentration charm, you basically get infinite slow motion as long as you can decently hit headshots, or at least do it every other hit. You can even miss some and still have plenty of time to completely reset that, making it possibly the best team wipeout sniper in the entire game by far. That's why I think that besides getting a complete 5 out of 5 for this, it also deserves an extra point to 6 out of 5 just because of how strong it is. There are some downsides, however. In 1 versus 1 boss fights, you practically get no advantage as you can't really use anything but your katana, so that is a major drawback. Survivability is also questionable because it depends on your positioning. This means being flanked or letting enemies get too close to you lets you pretty much defenseless. Also, ease of use isn't the greatest. Out of all the builds, I think that this is the most demanding and requires the most amount of items to truly make it shine, including some extra objectives in the Iki Island DLC, such as for example finding all deer shrines for the charm of Sugaru's sight or completing all Iki archery challenges for the extended concentration duration. Now at number 2, obviously no top ranking is complete without the Gosaku build. Obviously the best top 1 build in the game, only recently got dethroned. Its main draw is its power to stance break enemies, which combined with the charm of Susanoo and a couple of charms of fortune can easily open up enemies to instant one-shot assassinations. Except leaders that require 2, but still it's pretty much instantaneous. However, with the addition of the charm of versatile skill, which doubles the effect of charms of the same category, this frees up 2 minor charm slots where you can now get some extra effects on top of the ones that you didn't get before. So for example, you can combine this with the Charm of Silence and Broken Barriers, gain a massive boost resolve gain, which then lets you also incorporate a Heavenly Strike into this. So if you do a Heavenly Strike and then do one single heavy hit, that immediately destroys any enemy defense, opening them up for pretty much one-shot instant kills. You still only guard break one enemy at a time, which is why it only gets a 3 out of 5 in terms of group fight potential. Normally it would have been higher, but because you have to fight one enemy at a time, you technically don't take down multiple in one single hit. Now, because of its staggered damage and its importance in that lethal difficulty, this also scores really high in one-on-one boss fights. I would say a 4 out of 5 from all of the tools that you get. Survivability is also some of the highest in the game. Between the massive health boost and the heal on kill mechanic, you can practically become immortal, so definitely a 5 out of 5 from me. Ease of use isn't bad either. It's only going to require about 3 charms to completely shine out, and you also get it relatively early at the start of Act 2 once you complete its mythical tale. So overall, one of the best in the games, not perfect but kinda getting close there. Now, before going over the number 1 spot, there's one more armor build I want to cover, which technically shouldn't even exist. That is why it's outside of the ranking, and that is going to be the Kensei armor plus the Way of the Flame, specifically the build that uses the 2 New Game Plus charms called the Blazing Flame and the Steadfast Fire. Between these 3 items, you're essentially getting one of the most insane builds in the entire game, able to completely bypass any enemy weakness, spreads fire to multiple targets, and there's no other build in the game that can terrify enemies so easily. Literally, you can make like 5, 6, 7 enemies in one single camp to immediately run away in fear, pretty much taking them out completely out of the combat. And the reason why this is the case is because for some reason the Kensei armor bonus to ghost weapons also applies to the Way of the Flame. Normally, Way of the Flame is not a ghost weapon, it doesn't belong to that category, it's just a mythical ability. But it seems that even in the latest patch, at least on the PlayStation 5, after the PC release, it still works that way. So I went ahead and tested this both with the Kensei armor on and the broken armor with absolutely no charms installed, and on the hard difficulty it takes 3 attacks with the Kensei armor plus Way of the Flame to take down some of these enemies, and at the same time with the broken armor it requires 5 with the same ability. So I can only conclude that for some odd reason that buff to this day still applies to the Way of the Flame. You can further combine this with a charm of fleet foraging, which is going to make this whole cycle never ending. You're going to hit enemies, set them on fire with heavy attacks, spread fear in the camp, and then replenish the Way of the Flame every single hit you do against the enemy, or at least it has a very good chance of doing that whenever you hit enemies. That is why it's getting a massive boost to team wipeouts. It's not getting as much maybe in single target encounters, but Way of the Flame is still very strong in that scenario as well, so it's also going to score very well here too. Survivability is not going to be that much of an issue, maybe with the exception of lethal, because technically Way of the Flame lets you bypass enemies' defenses completely. So as long as you don't get hit and spread that fire, you're going to have a pretty decent survivability as well. Ease of use is going to be the lowest because it literally requires completing the entire game from start to finish and then restarting New Game Plus and also progressing a bit in it to afford some of these very strong charms. But this also brings us to the number 1 spot, which is going to go to the Sarugami armor. This is the one added in the Iki Island mythical tale, so you're going to have to finish that story over there. But since then, this plus the charm of Mashira's protection, also from the DLC, made it the top option for pretty much everything. In group fights, your perfect parry and perfect dodge have been replaced with much stronger variants. The perfect dodge now lets you follow up with a counter spin slash that literally also blinds enemies, which besides dealing tons of damage and pushing them back, also means you can follow up with an assassination. The perfect parry also follows up with a miniature and unparryable Dance of Wrath mechanic, letting you slash jump between 3 different targets, which is insanely strong and also bypasses defenses. Perfect dodge and perfect parries are also completely trivialized because of how the armor third bonus functions. And you can actually further buff that with an additional charm of Susanoo and one of Mashira's protection. So between the 3 bonuses, you can literally block or dodge a full second ahead and it's still going to trigger that effect. And since you generate lots of result anyway, yeah, this is literally going to give you tons of quick heals so you can stay up in fights all the time. That is why this armor scores perfect marks in group fights and single target boss encounters regardless of the difficulty. Its survivability is also extremely high, so it's close to perfect in there too. The only drawback here is ease of use, since technically you do need quite a few charms to make it work. You also need the armor, which is on the Iki Island, that's slightly more difficult than the normal content, so you do need quite a few to make it shine. Still, it's one of the highest scores of all, being an almost perfect with a 19 out of 20 score. That is why it truly deserves the top number 1 spot. Anyway, that's about it with the top builds. The lesson here is that no build is perfect, but there's lots of builds that can work in pretty much all gameplay scenarios. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.